There's a great story about Jane Goodall, the anthropologist, the chimp lady. Um, Many people would say, you could argue that she's the greatest anthropologist of all time. She had this curiosity about things, and she lived on a kind of a farm, and they had chickens, and she had this burning curiosity about how these eggs showed up all of a sudden. And the chickens would lay their eggs in this barn, and so Jane would see the chickens go in there and run in and try to watch them, and see how this is done. And of course they would scatter, and she never was successful. So at one point she thought, okay, I need to get into the barn before them. So she went and hid in the barn to wait for the chickens to come in and lay their eggs. And hours and hours went by, and finally a chicken came in and laid an egg. But what was happening in the meantime is the family had lost their little girl, and they were freaking out. And everybody was on this search for little Jane. And they called the neighbors and they called the police and everything else, and everybody was frantic. It was hours. But after the chicken laid the egg, she needed to tell her mom about what she had witnessed. So she came running out of the barn. And luckily for her, and maybe for all of us, in order to get her gift so many years later, her mom was the first person that she saw when she came out of the barn. And now I don't know about you, but if that were me, I know what my parents would have done. It's like, how could you scare the family? Like, don't you ever do that again? And, so on and so forth. But her mom saw, I guess, the wonderment in her eyes, and Jane ran up to her mom and said, started telling her what she saw, and mom just dove into the gifts, had the conversation with her. And she didn't find out until much later that the family had actually been freaking out about her being missing. And there is some old wisdom that says the gift is going to make a dramatic appearance at a young age, like around 7, 8, 9 years old. And how easily your life is in terms of living into your gift will depend on how your community or your family welcomes the appearance of that gift. And we see that in so many of our kids whose gift makes an appearance, and it's not what the family wanted it to be. Or it embarrasses the family because this kid knows something that we don't, as an adult or something like that. And but in the case of Jane Goodall, her mom knew enough to, honor the gift. And by the way, her mom was the one who went with her on her first expedition and kept the cabin for months while Jane was out in the woods following the chimps around. If only we all, could have that kind of experience. If we had a culture where all parents and adults knew that one of the most beautiful and powerful things we can do is watch for youth's gifts to show up and then celebrate them, so they could know that you were born with a divine purpose and live into that purpose and use those gifts. And so D.H. Lawrence understood this. He said, "The living self has one purpose only, to come into its own fullness of being, as a tree comes into full blossom, or a bird into spring beauty, or a tiger into luster." So, rest in peace, Lucas. Rest in peace, Jim. Look over us and help us recognize the gifts in others, so that they can find their peace and their joy and their fullness without waiting too long into their life.